Well, hello. My name is Barak. I'm not. I'm not a judge in Israel. I'm not like Othniel or Ehud or Shamgar, but I was called to help deliver Israel by one of our judges. In my time, the judge of Israel was a woman named Deborah. Deborah was an unusual judge for really three reasons. The first reason that she was an unusual judge is Deborah was a prophet, or a prophetess, if you like. She was called by God to speak the words of God to the nation. See, she wasn't just a deliverer, she wasn't just a judge, she was a prophet. Now, you need to understand the significance of that. See, in Israel, we hadn't had a prophet since the days of Moses. Moses was the great prophet. He's the one who led Israel out of Egypt, who gave us the law, who entered into covenant with God. He was our prophet. Now, you could say that Joshua was a prophet of type, but not like Moses was, and not like Deborah. We hadn't had a prophet for about 200 years in the nation Israel. And Deborah was our prophet. God called her to speak the words of God into the lives of us, his people. See, there's a difference between a judge and a prophet, a deliverer and a prophet. A judge, a deliverer, was one who rescued us from the bondage of our enemies. A prophet was the one who spoke the words of truth, God's truth. A prophet was the one who said, "This is what God wants you to know." The prophet, a deliverer, delivers from bondage. A prophet delivers the words of God. Deborah was our prophet. We needed to hear the words of God. In 200 years or so, we hadn't heard the direct words of God. And Deborah came along and told us the truth of the words of God. And we were a nation in chaos and turmoil, and we were going downhill in a hurry. I mean, that's after all why we were in bondage to the king of Canaan, whose name was Jabin. It had been 20 years since we had been able to rule our own land. But now we had Deborah, a prophet, and she was speaking the words of truth into our lives. And our nation certainly needed the words of truth. In fact, every nation needs the words of God's truth in their lives in order for them to continue being a nation. The second unusual thing about Deborah was that she was a deliverer of Israel in the sense she was a judge in the sense of judging. Usually judges were deliverers. That's really what the word means, deliverer. But it also has the sense of judging in a court of law. Now, many of the other judges became that judge in a court of law as they won the victory in their campaign against one of the kings. They were set in leadership and they became a judge to judge between disputes. But Deborah, before she even delivered the nation from the king of Jabin, she was a judge. She sat under a tree called the tree of Deborah, and people would line up, and people would seek the justice of God. They knew that she heard from God. They knew that she spoke from God. And so when they had disputes over the law, they had disputes between each other, they would line up and they would go to Deborah. And Deborah would bring them the justice of God. Deborah would bring them the words of God. Before Deborah delivered the nation from the hand of Jabin, Deborah was delivering the word of God to the nation, even while we were under bondage. See, that's unusual. Deborah was a prophet. Deborah was delivering the words of God. She was a judge. She was delivering justice to the nation. Any nation that doesn't hear the voice of God anymore is a nation that doesn't know justice. We were a nation that didn't know justice. We were in chaos. We didn't know the words of God, but Deborah came and spoke the words of God, and Deborah came and restored God's justice to our nation. So there's a third thing that was unusual about Deborah. Not only was she a prophet, not only was she a judge in the sense of judging between the law, but she was also, well, a woman. And that was unusual in Israel. Now, all throughout your scriptures, you will see women in leadership, and God uses women in leadership. That's a good thing. But it's unusual. It was a sign that God was doing something different. God was getting our attention. Whenever something unusual happens and God is directing the unusual, you need to pay attention. And we as a nation needed to pay attention, because God was certainly doing the unusual. We'd been in bondage for 20 years. 20 years to King Jabin, king of the Canaanites. We had peace under Othniel, under Ehud rather. We had peace for 80 years. Well, a kind of peace. But when Othniel died, the nation, we as a people, we began to descend back into sin. We began to leave God. We began to think that, well, maybe God's not all that vital to our health and our living in our nation anyway. And we began to do whatever we wanted to do. We lived as we thought best. Right became wrong and wrong became right. Whatever suited me was the way I was going to live. What guided our nation wasn't truth. It wasn't justice. It wasn't covenant. What guided our nation was convenience, was self-centeredness, and was desire. We just did whatever we felt like doing. We walked away from God. We who were the people of God, called to be separate, called to be a special nation, called to be a holy nation, to show people who God really is, we walked away. Because we could, I guess. And we no longer cared about God. I guess I have to admit that I was one of those people. God just really wasn't vital to my life. And we walked away. And here we are finding ourselves again in bondage to another king, because God gave us over. When we decide we don't need to listen to God, God gives us over. And we've been given over for 20 years. And maybe if you're in that place where your life is in chaos and your life has been given over because you haven't considered God to be as of vital importance to your life, maybe you can do what we did. Because finally, after 20 years of wandering away from God, we decided we needed God again. And we cried out to God. And we called out to God. And we said, God, we can't do it on our own. God, we need you. God, you're right. And we're wrong. Anytime someone calls out to God, anytime you decide that you need God, it's a step of truth. Anytime we begin to say, God, I need you because I can't do it on my own, we begin to walk in the truth. And we needed to walk in the truth. Because we'd been wandering in falsehood for so long that we needed to hear what the truth was. And so thankfully God sent us Deborah, a prophet, a judge, someone who spoke truth into our lives. And as we cried out to God, Deborah heard from God. Deborah heard the answer from God. And Deborah called me Barak. I wasn't a judge, but I had the fortune of being called by a judge to help deliver our nation. I was a warrior. I am a warrior. I lead armies. I lead people. And Deborah called me and said, Barak, I need to talk to you. So I came to the tree of Deborah, and we spoke. And she said to me, Barak, God has commanded you to take 10,000 a force of 10,000 people from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. And you are to go to Mount Tabor. And there at Mount Tabor, I will lead Sisera. Sisera was the general of Jabin's army. Sisera was a great general. And God said, I will lead Sisera and his army and his chariots. I will lead them down into the valley. I will lead them to the Kishon River. And there I will deliver them into your hands. What? Are you kidding me, Deborah? Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second. You're telling me that I'm supposed to get 10,000 troops and we're to go to Mount Tabor, and Mount Tabor overlooks the Jezreel Valley. And through the Jezreel Valley runs the Kishon River. In fact, I'm standing in front of Mount Tabor right now. And this is where I led the troops, at Mount Tabor. And if you could see down in the valley, you would see the Kishon River. And as it ascends up into the other mountain hillside, that's where Sisera would be. Now you need to know something about Sisera. Sisera had 900 chariots fitted with iron. He had 900 iron chariots. Now that probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but chariots, iron chariots, were the most advanced weapon in that time. If you had chariots, you were by far and away the strongest army. 900 iron chariots, pulled by fierce horses. All they did was they galloped as fast as they could do, and you had these iron chariots coming at you, and they busted through your lines, and they ran people over, and there were a couple of guys in the chariots swinging swords at you. You had no chance against chariots. And Sisera had 900 of them. What in the world were we supposed to do against 900 chariots? Come on, Deborah. God's commanded us to go? I don't think so. You've got to be pretty convinced about the truth of your relationship with God to go up against 900 chariots. And not only the 900 chariots, but his army. It wasn't just the 900 chariots, it was his full army, which was far and away above our 10,000 men that I could ever get. How could I possibly get 10,000 troops to say, hey, we're going to attack Sisera, we're going against 900 iron chariots, because that's what God wants us to do? How would I get 10,000? Maybe 10. It didn't make sense. I know Deborah's a prophet. I know Deborah speaks the words of God. But maybe she got this one wrong. Because this doesn't make sense to me. I certainly wasn't going to be the one to shoulder this responsibility. I wasn't going to be the one to take the blame for this failure. So I said to Deborah, because I certainly didn't want to go. So I said to her, okay, here's the deal then. If you think God has commanded me to go and get 10,000 troops, I'll do that, but you've got to come with me. I'm not doing this by myself. I am not taking on this responsibility. If you want this to happen, if you really believe this is from God, then you've got to come. 900 iron chariots is quite a deterrent from following God, let me tell you. When your enemy is that big, when your enemy is that powerful, you've got to be really convinced that you know who God is and that you trust him. So I really didn't think Deborah was going to say yes. But she did. Deborah said, okay. I was trying to get out of it. I was trying to say, oh yeah, okay, let's put your life where your mouth is then, Deborah. If you think God has commanded me to go on this suicide mission, then you come with me. You stand on the battlefield with me. You charge with me. You be there with me. Because if this thing goes bad, she's going to go bad with it. I'm not doing this on my own. But she said, yes, I will go with you. I guess she trusted God. I guess she believed God. I guess she, I got to tell you, she's got a better relationship with God than I ever had. Because there's no way I wanted to do this. There's no way I thought this was something that we could do. But she said, yes, let's go. So I went back to my hometown, and there I summoned 10,000 troops. Now, where I lived was in the tribe of Naphtali. I'm from the tribe of Naphtali up in the north, and the tribe south of me was Zebulun. We kind of hung out together. We were close relatives, of course, and our town was kind of a border town. And so we went to Kadesh, which is where I'm from, and I summoned 10,000 troops. And 10,000 men came, all from Zebulun and from Naphtali, and a force of 10,000 strong. And we marched, well, we fitted them first with armor, and we gave them the best equipment we could get, and we gave them provisions and supplies, and I kind of told them what the deal was, and this is what we were doing, and I was surprised that they stuck with it. But I guess they knew that, I was known as a military leader, and I think more importantly, they knew Deborah was a prophet. They knew Deborah spoke from God. They knew Deborah heard God. And when they heard those words, I guess they believed they were the words of the truth of God. And so we assembled together and we began to march. And we came to Mount Tabor. And we camped at Mount Tabor. And somebody must have told Sisera what we were doing. I mean, you can't hide 10,000 troops, especially when they have spies all over the place. And someone ran and told Sisera what we were doing. And Sisera, of course, gathered his army. And he gathered his 900 chariots. And they assembled on the opposite side of the valley from us. And things didn't look good. At least I didn't think things looked good. Like, when those 900 chariots come rumbling down that hill, and they come charging across the Kishon River, and they come charging across that plain, we are out in the open. There's nothing between us and charging horses and pounds of iron with wheels that will crush you. I don't know about this. I was thinking it over. I was mulling it over. I was worried. I just didn't see that this thing was going to work. Deborah came up to me and Deborah said, "Go. Like, what are you waiting here for? Go." She knew I didn't want to. She knew that I was hesitant. She knew that I thought this was a bad idea. But she came and she said, "Go. Go." And then she said something else. She said, "Don't you know that God has already gone ahead of you? God has gone ahead of you already. He's already there. He's already planted. He's already advancing on those troops. Go. Trust God. Trust His words. Trust me. I know what I'm talking about. I've heard God. Now go." So what could I do? I went. I gathered the troops. I said, "Okay, guys, here's the deal. We're going to run down the mountain. We're going to run into that valley. We're going to run into those 900 chariots of iron. We're going to run into the troops behind them if by some miraculous power we get through the chariots. Guys, this is not going to be easy. Guys, this is not going to be fun. Guys, look at each other. This might be the last time you see each other. But let's go. Let's go." And so we started running down Mount Tabor, and we started charging, and we started yelling, and we started to be as fierce as we could possibly be. And Sisera began charging down his side of the mountain with those 900 chariots of iron and all the troops behind him. And as we started going down, all of a sudden the skies opened up and the thunder rumbled and we had rain pouring down from the skies. I mean, the rain was coming down in torrents and the wind was blowing and there was so much rain. It's like that maybe you can possibly know how much rain was coming down. It's like when the sky opens up and you just think, how can this much water come down at the same time? That's what it was like. That's what was happening there. The water was pouring down. And the water was sucking, being drawn into that land. And the plain began to fill up with water. The land could not drink in the water fast enough. And the Kishon River began to overflow. And that land began to soak up that water. And it became a muddy mess that sucked in your feet when you took a step. You know that kind of feeling? It was just so spongy and oozy, and you stepped in it and you didn't want to release your foot without some sort of force on your part. And it sucked everything in. And those 900 chariots of war, those 900 chariots of war that were coming at us, those dangerous 900 chariots of war, they became 900 iron chariots of dead weight. And they were sucked into the ground, and the horses couldn't even pull them anymore. And it was the most amazing thing I'd ever been part of. Here are these 900 deadly chariots that have now become 900 dead weights. And the guys driving the chariots and the guys in the chariots, they knew they were in trouble because they saw us charging at them. And we were picked up speed when we saw that happen. And those guys jumped out and they ran the other way. They were not used to seeing people charge towards them. They were used to seeing people's backs as they were running away. And now they were the ones running away. And we saw their backs and we charged after them. And the whole army behind them got so scared because their chariot drivers were running away that they began to run away also. And they couldn't run very fast because they were getting sucked into the mud. And we routed the whole entire army. Routed is simply a nice family-friendly word that says we killed them all. We didn't let one man escape. All of Sisera's army was dead because we killed them. Because God had let the rains come and rendered those chariots useless. And when he rendered their war weapons useless, their hearts melted and they were useless. And we killed them all. Except Sisera. Sisera's chariot, he hung back a little bit. He tried to get away. You could see his horses were trying to pull him out of the mud. And when he realized that he couldn't get away, he jumped out of his chariot. I paid attention to where he went because I wanted Sisera. He was the commander of their army. I was the commander of our army, and I was keeping an eye on him. He jumped out and he started running away. I began to run after him. I couldn't quite get to him. I got caught up into a little skirmish in front of me. I had to fight my way out of, but I kept note of where he went. And when I could fight my way out, I followed Sisera, and I knew where he was going. I knew exactly where Sisera would be. Because Sisera ran to the tents of the Kenites. Now, the Kenites, I know you don't know anything about the Kenites, but the Kenites were the descendants of Moses' father-in-law. They kind of hung around with Israel after Moses led Israel. And they were descended from Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. The Kenites weren't really part of Israel, but they hung around with Israel. But the Kenites made an agreement. They made a covenant with Jabin, king of the Canaanites. And so they were allies to Jabin. And so I knew that Sisera would go to the tents of the Kenites because they were just a little bit north of where we were. And so I ran to the tents of Kenan. And I started asking around, and I thought maybe I'm going to have to fight off the Canaanites. Maybe I'm going to have to continue this war, and maybe I won't get Sisera. But I was asking around for Sisera. And Sisera was there, all right. I met there a woman named Jael. Jael was a Canaanite. Jael was the wife of Heber. Heber was away from his tent. I don't know where he was, but he wasn't there. And Sisera came into Jael's tent and said to Jael, "Hide me. Give me a place to rest. I've got to get away from the Israelites. I've just come from battle and we've just lost. I've got to get back to King Jabin. I got to hide out until they're gone. So Jael invited him. Well, didn't really invite him. He just kind of went in. But Jael gave him a place to sleep and said, lie down here, and put blankets over him. And Sisera said, I need a drink. I'm thirsty. Give me some water. Jael not only gave him water, but Jael did one better. Jael gave him milk. I'm guessing that Jael gave him warm milk. Because warm milk, when you drink it at night, puts you to sleep. And so Jael gives Sisera a nice, tall, fat glass of warm milk. Covers him up. And Sisera, being worn out from the battle, worn out, exhausted seeing his troops die, worn out from running away and hiding in the tent, snuggles under the covers and goes to sleep. And so I said, I want to see him. I've got to get this guy. I've got to kill this guy. And Jael said, he's already dead. What do you mean he's already dead? How can you be already dead? You just told me he's in the tent. And Jael said, yes, I killed him. What? You killed Jael? You killed Sisera? And Jael said, she killed Sisera when Sisera was sleeping. When Sisera was fast asleep, when Sisera was snoring, he was dead to the world. Jael made sure he really was. Jael took a tent peg. Now this is the PG part of the story. Jael took a tent peg, and she took a hammer. And she put that tent peg on Sisera's temple, right there when he was sleeping. And she hammered that tent peg right through one end, it came out the other and into the ground. And she pegged him to the ground. And she killed Sisera. I remembered at that point in time, I remembered the words of Deborah to me. Because after I had said to Deborah, I don't believe that we're going to win. I don't believe that we could do this. After my doubt and disbelief about God, after I questioned her relationship with God, after I questioned the truth, her belief in the truthfulness of the words of God, after I questioned that, after I challenged her to come with us, Deborah said to me, she said, because of what you've just done, because you don't believe, because of your doubt, because of your lack of trust in the mighty God, because of that, you will not gain the honor for killing Sisera. The honor will not be yours, but the honor instead will go to a woman. Now you need to understand, women aren't people of war. Women didn't join the army in my day. It was men who fought. It was men who were warriors. It was men who made up the armies. It was men who were to protect their families. It was men who were to protect their wives and their mothers and their mother-in-laws and their daughters and their nieces. It was men who were to take up arms. It was men who were to be strong. It was men who were to stand up. It was men who were to say, yes, God, I trust you. It was men who were to do that, and we didn't. It was a rebuke to me. It was a rebuke to not only my warring leadership skills, but it was a rebuke to my spiritual leadership skills. Because I was supposed to stand up and trust God and lead in trust to God. But I didn't trust God. I didn't know God. I had walked away from God. And so Deborah said, because of your disbelief, because you don't trust the words of God, even when I just told you. Even when I just told you the words of God, you heard them, you know they're true, they ring true, you know it's true. But since you said, I don't accept it, I don't believe it, I don't trust, you're going to lead the army, but you're not going to get the honor. And the honor went to Jael. Jael who trusted God. Jael who said, I am going to kill Sisera. because she knew that that was what God had asked her to do. She didn't doubt. She didn't hesitate. She didn't say, hey, I don't want that responsibility. Put it on someone else. She said, okay. The words of God are true. The words of God always come true. Here I was, a person of Israel, a leader in Israel, a nation set apart from God, a nation that was supposed to know God, a nation that was supposed to lead people closer to God, a nation whose God had led us out of Egypt and brought us into this promised land, who'd done miracle after miracle after miracle, whose words never were false but were always true. Everything he said came true. Here I was knowing that but not living that. See, I knew who God was. I knew the words of God. But I didn't have faith and trust enough to live the words of God. I failed. I failed to live the words of God. Maybe you can understand that. Maybe you can recognize that. Maybe you could see that around you or in you. We sometimes know the words of God. We sometimes claim to know God. We sometimes make a big deal about who we are, and then sometimes when it comes right down to it and we hear the words of God, and he says to me, do this, he commands me to do something, sometimes we say, I don't know. God, I don't think I trust you enough. Because what you're asking me to do is that's life-changing. And the enemy looks pretty overpowering. I don't know if I can trust you. May I encourage you that it doesn't have to be your failure. Seek God. Look to God. Lean into God. It doesn't have to be our failure. He can turn it into a victory. I remember Deborah's words to me. She said, hasn't God already gone ahead of you? In other words, don't you trust God? He's already there. He's already done it. He's already prepared it. All you have to do is go. All you have to do is trust. All you have to do is believe and go. It doesn't have to end in failure. Go. Go to God. Go and be where he's called you to be. Go and be with him. May that be the case for you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Let me close with the priestly blessing that God gave for Aaron and the priest to bless others. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord cause his face to shine upon you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Thanks for joining us. Know the peace of God today.